Okay.
Hello and welcome once again to Bible Talk with Bruce and Becky. We're going to depart, at least for part of this episode, from the format we've been following, which is to work our way through the book of Genesis, because a certain woman that I've been married to for over 50 years said she wanted to talk about some questions that come to her mind, especially warfare in the Pentateuch, the first part of the Old Testament. What was the other one? Slavery?
No. Just warfare this time.
No, I didn't mean this time.
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought you raised another.
Yeah, eventually we'll talk about slavery.
Yeah, when we get to Joseph in the last part of Genesis, we'll talk more about slavery.
We had gone over the big war between the tribes when Abraham went to save Lot. So that's what brought it up.
This issue is a stumbling block or a point of contention for many people about the Old Testament, going back even to the second and third centuries of the Christian era. And so we'll start by looking at some of the laws in the Pentateuch about warfare concerning Israel. We'll look at Deuteronomy chapter 20. And Becky, you'll read, please, verses 10 through 15.
When you go near a city to fight against it, then proclaim an offer of peace to it. And it shall be that if they accept your offer of peace and open to you, then all the people who are found in it shall be placed under tribute to you and serve you. Now if the city will not make peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. And when the Lord your God delivers it into your hands, you shall strike every male in it with the edge of the sword. But the women, the little ones, the livestock, and all that is in the city, all its spoil, you shall plunder for yourself, and you shall eat the enemy's plunder, which the Lord your God gives you. Thus you shall do to all the cities which are very far from you, which are not of the cities of these nations.
All right, that's the first part of the laws of warfare. Israel here is on the verge of entering the promised land, the land of Canaan. Moses is giving final instructions to the people. He'll not be allowed to go with them across the Jordan. And he makes a distinction here, apparently speaking for the Lord, about cities that are far away and cities that are part of the land of Canaan that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They can offer terms of peace. If the cities decide to fight against them, they'll kill all the males, but everything else will be part of the spoils or the plunder that they take. But in the next paragraph, a distinction is made about the cities in the land of Canaan. But in the cities of these peoples that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes. Everything that has breath is to be put to the sword, including the women, the children, the infants, the disabled, and in most cases even the animals. Verse 17, you shall devote them to the kerem, or put them under the kerem, the Hebrew word that means consecrated to God. In the case of people who are put under the kerem, they are to be killed. Excuse me. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded. And here's the reason for that they may not teach you to do according to all their abominable practices that they have done for their gods, and so you sin against the Lord your God. God tells them in these laws of warfare that if they spare any of the people who've been in Canaan for centuries, that those people will lead Israel astray and teach them to do what he calls the abominable practices of their worship, which included child sacrifice. Now, this commandment sounds very much like, and many people say it is, genocide, or what we nowadays call ethnic cleansing. That is, eliminating a whole group of people when you conquer them in warfare. This has troubled people, and it's troubling to me as well, for centuries. And so people try to find explanations of this, or even to explain it away as a part of Christianity, especially. Let's look at a couple of these explanations about why God would command something like genocide. The first one goes back at least to the 2nd century of the Christian era and on into centuries following. And two groups of people especially had this explanation. Becky, I haven't prompted you for this, but can you guess what the oldest explanation would be?
No.
Put you on the spot.
No.
Okay. The oldest explanation is to say the God of the Old Testament is not the same as the God of the New Testament.
That was goofy. That's goofy.
That's goofy? Why do you say that?
Because God is the same.
Well, to paraphrase a former president of ours, not the most recent one, it depends on what God is. What you mean by God? A fellow in the Roman church in the 2nd century, a deacon in that church whose name was Marcion, M-A-R-C-I-O-N, acquired a great dislike for the God of the Old Testament, and he eliminated the Old Testament from his canon, the canon of the church, that is the scriptures that had authority, as well as all the references to the Old Testament that are found in the New Testament, saying that the God of the Old Testament was a lesser God than the God of Jesus, and that we don't have to follow any of those laws like this distasteful law of genocide because we don't worship that God. A similar position was taken by the people that came to be known as Gnostics. Their name means those who are in the know, or the ones who have special knowledge. And they said that Jesus came from the higher God, the true God, the God of love, and came to free us from the God of the Old Testament and to teach us the truth about what God was really like. Similar views have continued down to the present time. I was reading just yesterday about a scholar from a particular denomination who said that we should set our standard of what really comes from God by Jesus and his revelation of love, and so we can just ignore those Old Testament teachings as these are being misunderstood by Israel, our God giving a fuller revelation in Jesus. Well, what do you think about that explanation? As you say, you think it's the same God in the New Testament as the Old?
Well, it either is or we've got a whole lot of gods going on.
That could be.
No. No.
That's a possibility. I don't think it's a biblical possibility or even a good philosophical or theological possibility, but it can be considered.
Well, Jesus did change everything.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't exactly change the Old Testament, but he fulfilled it. He ended the dominance of those legalistic practices.
Okay.
And he showed us the purpose, what God's purpose was through all of that.
That's true.
But I still don't understand what he was doing back then exactly.
Okay, well, we'll work on that for a few minutes. Had a thought in my mind, but I lost it
Sorry.
when I listened. That's your fault. It's called getting older. I have heard that as people age, they sometimes don't think as quickly as they used to. But one thing we can notice if we read the whole New Testament as well is that it gets pretty bloody at times too. Especially those parts of the New Testament that are called apocalyptic or eschatological, a couple of big words. Apocalypse, which is sometimes the name given to the book of Revelation, means an unveiling. And if you read, for example, Revelation chapter 19, where Jesus returns to the earth for the final judgment, guess how he comes back to the earth? Does he come as the peaceful, gentle shepherd? He comes as a warrior with his robe dipped in blood to take vengeance on all those who have refused to follow him and instead are following the beast and the false prophet. A very bloody scene where all the carrion birds, the predators, are called to come to the great feast of the Lord, and they feast on the bodies of all of Jesus' enemies. Well, you say Revelation is just symbolic. Well, it is symbolic of something. And when Jesus predicted his second coming, it included the death of his enemies and their ultimate destruction in the lake of fire. However, we're not going to, at least I'm not going to accept the bifurcating the Bible into Old Testament that we can mostly discard and New Testament, which somehow brings a different or better revelation. Even the New Testament book of Hebrews says it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. He is so holy that he does not abide sin in his presence. Well, the more common way to deal with these warfare portions of the Old Testament is to try to construct what is called by philosophers and theologians a theodicy. Theodicy, Theodicy. Becky will, while I take a sip of my tea, explain what a theodicy is.
Theo means God,
That's right.
and Odyssey is something else.
Yes. The O in Odyssey is part of Theo. Theo.
CC.
Dikeo in Greek means righteous or just. It's an attempt to show that God is just in what he does, or righteous, and that his holiness explains the Old Testament passages of total destruction. Let's outline kind of a basic theodicy of how you would explain what God is doing in the Old Testament. I think you can say first that he was very patient before he ordered the destruction of the people who inhabited Canaan at the time of the Exodus. At least 5 centuries before that, he told Abraham, and I think we'll see this when we return to Genesis, that he was going to give the land of Canaan to Abraham's descendants, but the time was not yet right. And he says, because the wickedness of the Amorites has not yet reached its fullness. In other words, he was going to wait until these sinful people got to the point that they were nothing but sinful, and that's all they were going to be. He waited about half a millennium, 500 years, before ordering their destruction. We could also point out that this was not the first time God destroyed or killed large numbers of people. When would that be?
In the flood.
The flood destroyed everybody except 8 people. Because we saw in reading about the flood, every intent of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And God promises to destroy those who rebel against him when Christ returns. So we have to consider not only God's love and mercy and grace, which is very abundant, but also his righteousness, holiness, and justice. It seems to me that there has to be punishment for stubborn, obstinate sin, or there is no justice in the world.
Which takes us to the point where we have to ask ourselves, what part do we play in that ultimate justice? Are we supposed to be going out and wielding a sword to accomplish God's purposes? And I hate to even ask, when do you personally go to war? I mean,
You talking about me?
well, as a Christian, do you pick up the sword and go fight and kill, or?
Well, that's such an easy question that it's never been debated throughout the history of Christianity. Well, I'm being facetious. That's something the Bible doesn't spell out. Although if we look back in history, at least for the first 2 or 3 centuries, Christians refused to participate in warfare. On the other hand, you have Roman soldiers like Cornelius who become followers of Christ. I think it's an individual matter. They tried to draft me in 1967 during the Vietnam War, and I failed the physical because of my birth defects, but I probably would have gone in response to that draft. Some Christians say Christians should only fight in a just war. That was Augustine's position, St. Augustine. I think if you look at any of the wars of history, it's hard to find one that's actually just or righteous from one side or the other.
But either side can justify their position, and by the grace of God, I hope we never in the United States start saying, you know, this side is Christian and this side is evil, although we've already come to that, I think.
Well, I hear you, but that goes somewhat astray from what we're looking at in the Old Testament. There we're trying to see why God might have ordered this destruction. I tend to think that God knows when people have reached a point of no return in their sinfulness, and He knew that if they did not eliminate the people who were in Canaan at the time of the occupation of the land, the promised land, that Israel would go astray. And in fact, the rest of the Old Testament shows that they did not carry out this instruction for one reason or another. One famous instance, Joshua was deceived by the Gibeonites, but God's prediction was true, of course. Israel did wander astray because of the influence of the people that remained in that land, including the wisest of all the kings of Israel. Who would that be?
Solomon.
Solomon, because of all of his wives and concubines. Concubines? Concubines. I was thinking about the old joke where the boy came home from Sunday school and said they had learned that Solomon had 300 wives and 700 porcupines. Those foreign wives, whom Solomon had married mostly for political purposes, led him astray so that he set up the idols of their gods, even in the temple area in Jerusalem. God knew that the influence of these people would be only bad on Israel when they entered the promised land. One more point I want to make. Becky, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I want to say when the guards, the Romans, came to get Jesus, that rather than fight, he said, put away your sword.
That's right.
You know, and had he wanted to destroy evil at that point, all he had to do was say, put it on, you know.
Yes, when he told Peter to put away his sword, he said, if I called on the Father, he would send me 12 legions of angels to fight on my behalf. That's not what he was about. That's not what his kingdom is.
And yeah, he's still not about that. No. And if we are seeking vengeance on anybody, God says, let me take care of it.
Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. However, one more important point, I think, before we end this discussion. We people, human beings, tend to try to judge God and what God does and says. For example, among the scholarly world, and I'm talking about biblical scholarship, especially in modern times, people say things like, I could not worship a God who would order that kind of destruction. And how could Christians say that that was right? And so on. I don't have all the answers on that, but I will say, or ask the question to begin with, by what standard would we judge God? We have to have some standard of right and wrong if we're going to say, I think what God did here was wrong. What standard would that be in the case of God? How would we judge him? In order to judge God, we would have to be either equal to or greater than God, it seems to me. In fact, God says in the book of Isaiah, my ways are not your ways, and my thoughts are not your thoughts. As far as the heaven is above the earth, so my ways are above your ways, and my thoughts above your thoughts. We are not meant to understand everything that God does. So I'm going to plead ignorance on some of this. In order to judge God or to say we fully understand what God does or should do, again, I would say we'd have to be either equal to God or greater than God. After all, the judge has some standard higher than just his own opinion. Let me quote a philosopher with whom I have very little agreement, but I'll agree on this. The German philosopher Nietzsche said, if there is no God, then anything goes. And having taught philosophy and theology in several universities, studied it for a long time, I would say if there's no God, no standard higher than any human being, then everybody's view of right and wrong is equal. That's pretty much what the modern world says. It's all just opinion, and what I believe is right may not be what you believe is right. So everybody's view has equal authority. That's called relativism. A couple more things that I'll yield to you.
Okay.
Having taught high school and college students for many years, I find that in our day and age in America, most of those young people that I taught are relativists. That is, they say, I might not like this particular behavior, but who am I to judge? Everybody has a right to their own opinion. I've often been tempted, and I'm not the first one who thought this way, if somebody told me that, to punch them in the nose as hard as I could. And if they object, I would just say, well, my standard of value says it's okay to punch anybody that I want to. And my opinion is equal to yours. I don't think they would accept that view. In fact, I used to in the classes when we begin a discussion like this, right on the board. No statement is equally true for all people at all times. And I would ask the class, do you agree with that? And most of them would say yes. And I said, well, if what I just wrote there is true, then it's not true. Because it claims to be a statement that's true for all people at all times. It's not relative. And I would maintain if there is a God, then there is a standard of right or wrong greater than ours. And we have no better standard to judge God's behavior. All right, I yield the floor to my lovely wife.
One of the things that comforts me that you have said to me in the past is that these people that were wiped off the face of the earth, including children, weren't necessarily sent to some place of punishment. That was not God's deal. He wasn't ready to punish them. He just wanted them not around to do any more harm and to influence his people.
A good point. I'm glad I've done some good over the years.
And there was something else I wanted to say. Yeah, I'm getting as old as you are, I guess.
Not quite, but you're gaining on me. Well, we're going to have to wrap this up. I'll say again, I don't have all the answers to a difficult issue like this. I've just shared with you some of the things that have made more sense to me over the years as I've examined it. And I'll just quote Abraham in this case, as he said to God, who was about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, will not the judge of all the earth do right?
That's the one.
Mm-hmm. And I believe, for many reasons, that the God of the Bible is the one true God. And so I will withhold judgment on this issue, although it continues to be a difficult thing, and we don't need to say we've reached the last word on it. But here's the last word for this particular episode. Next time we'll resume in the book of Genesis. But don't forget, don't send money. Bye-bye, everybody.